And we are back with news from the Middle East. The Rafah crossing in Gaza reopened Sunday after confusion over reopening operations closed the critical border point on Friday and Saturday. Egyptian state media reported that a limited number of Palestinians were able to travel through that Rafah crossing on Sunday following a two-day closure.
The critical border crossing was reopened for the first time since last week, since 2024, as a key requirement of the U.S.-backed ceasefire deal. But the rollout has been shaky, and Palestinians who returned to Gaza in the first few days of the reopening described hours of delays and invasive searches by Israeli authorities.
NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from Tel Aviv with more. Good morning, Matt. The Rafah crossing reopened last week, part of that ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Less than a week into its reopening, the border point closed for 2 days. Why did the Rafah crossing close, and how is that affecting Gazans seeking medical care outside of the Strip?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of unclear exactly why it closed. It's unclear why there were so many delays in processing Palestinians who were trying to cross both ways over this border. There were really formidable security challenges blocking some of these Palestinians from moving either out of Gaza or from Egypt and into Gaza. And a lot of Palestinians who are desperately seeking medical care have been very disappointed by the long delays. As you mentioned, there are tens of thousands of people who are desperately trying to leave the Gaza Strip in order to seek medical care abroad. There's also quite a few people who are trying to enter the Gaza Strip after having sought medical care outside of the enclave and are now trying to return home to their families. Now, all in all, in the first week, we've only seen about 36 people crossing. That is, and in terms of medical patients, and then there were dozens more. That is very, very low, considering that the original promise for opening the crossing to both traffic directions was that 50 people would cross in either direction. So clearly, we're still seeing quite a few complications here.
And Matt, in terms of the Palestinians who say they were mistreated by Israeli officials, what can you tell us about what exactly is happening on the ground, and has the IDF or other Israeli officials responded yet?
Well, this is a very, very sensitive issue, the Rafah border crossing. It isn't a surprise that the Israelis would be using their utmost security prevention procedures when it comes to dealing with people who are crossing back and forth. That having been said, there were complaints from people, as you mentioned, saying that the treatments and the security procedures were invasive, that they lasted for hours, that they were sort of crude and rude in their dealing with some of the Palestinians. So this is the kind of thing that isn't necessarily going to surprise a lot of Palestinians who live in Gaza. They knew that there were going to be serious restrictions, and there were serious restrictions in the run-up to actually moving across the border. A lot of these Palestinians had to apply for access, and that access wasn't always given.
Matt, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he's expected to travel to Washington this week. He's going to meet with the president. His office said talks will focus on Iran. Last week, the U.S. conducted indirect talks with the Iranians, which seemed like a diplomatic step forward. Do we have any sense of what Netanyahu's message with President Trump will be?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be focused mostly, as you said, on Iran rather than on issues like the ceasefire and the Gaza Strip, though those will certainly be part of those meetings we can expect. The real issue here is that President Donald Trump has been threatening, as you know, Iran over the past 2 weeks, mostly in regard to the protests that have since stopped in Iran. Benjamin Netanyahu is also going to be paying very close attention to those negotiations that you mentioned that already started in a good way. Now, he's going to be asking President Trump to make sure that it's not just the nuclear topic that he's talking about, but also Iran's ballistic missiles, one of the major issues in these negotiations and one of the things that the Trump administration has listed in terms of what they want to see the Iranians give up. They want to see the Iranians limit the scope and the distance those ballistic missiles can travel so that they won't hit here once again, as they did last year, here in Israel.
All right, Matt Bradley, thank you so much, Matt.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.